After the tone, please state your name followed by the pound sign.
Your line has been muted.
England Wetland Webinar Series. This last episode in our short spring series will feature Lisa Rhodes of MassDEP. She will be presenting Chicopee Watershed Monitoring and Assessment, the summary and findings. We will follow Lisa's presentation with a Q&A and discussion. I am Kimberly Roth, your webinar moderator. I'm an environmental analyst with New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, or NEWIPIC, and I manage our wetlands programs. Please welcome Lisa Rhodes. Lisa serves as MassDEP's Wetland Monitoring Assessment Program Manager, and in this capacity oversees the annual wetland monitoring and assessment effort. Lisa also led the soon-to-be-released Wetland Mitigation Success Study and the recently released Chicopee Watershed Monitoring and Assessment Study for MassDEP. Lisa has a BS in Natural Resources from the University of Rhode Island and has completed graduate-level courses in hydrogeology at BU's Geology Department. All right, passing it off to you, Lisa.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending today. I'm happy to finally be presenting this study to you about our wetlands monitoring and assessment in the Chicopee Watershed. This study of the Chicopee Watershed in Massachusetts is our first pilot effort to conduct an assessment of wetland conditions. Our monitoring and assessment strategy and the tools we use to conduct this study have been under development since 2007 or earlier. This study was funded by EPA through the 2013 Wetland Program Development Grant, and I want to send my thanks to EPA for their support of this study, and also thanks to Kim Roth of NEWIPIC for inviting us to present this study today. With me today is my colleague and co-author of this study, Mike McHugh of MassDEP. Mike is the acting section chief of our Wetland Conservancy program, which is our program that does all the wetland mapping across the state. He's also the lead field manager on this study and did most of the CAPS assessment and biological assessment on the study as well. I also want to acknowledge Scott Jackson and Brad Compton of UMass Amherst, who helped us on this study, and also Weldon Langley and Alice Smith of MassDEP, who also contributed to this study. Okay, I'm trying to advance the slide. Hold on. Kim, this slide doesn't seem to be advancing for me.
Yep, just give a click on the screen and a little bit more in the center, and a little bit more in the center. There you go. You should be able to advance.
Okay, there we go. First, I want to start with just to answer the question, why are we, monitoring and assessing wetlands? Section 303 of the Federal Clean Water Act requires that states adopt water quality standards to define the range of physical, chemical, and biological condition in normal waters. Since the Clean Water Act defines waters as wetlands, the requirement for water quality standards are also applicable to wetlands. Massachusetts has two primary regulations that address wetlands: the Massachusetts Water Quality Certification Regulations and the State Wetlands Protection Act regulations. These regulations focus on dredge and fill and not really on wetland condition or quality. Massachusetts also has water quality standards that apply to wetlands, but were primarily developed for waters. So this is why we're working on monitoring wetlands and assessing wetland quality. In Massachusetts, we also have a report called the Integrated Waters Report. This report is where results from water monitoring are listed in accordance with Section 305B and 303D of the Clean Water Act. The results of this study will be included in that report. So this study focuses on biological condition of forested wetlands in the Chicopee Watershed. In wetlands, fish, other aquatic life, and wildlife is a very important designated use that we're focused here on in this study. In addition to reporting on wetland condition, knowing wetland condition helps us make knowledgeable management decisions. Monitoring and assessment of wetlands helps us to understand what's causing degradation by observing patterns associated with land uses. This information is valuable in helping us to develop better regulations, policies, and guidance to protect wetlands. In 2007, MassDEP began working with UMass Amherst and the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management to develop a monitoring and assessment strategy for wetlands. EPA recommends a 3-level assessment system that includes a landscape or desktop assessment and rapid and intensive site assessments. The Massachusetts strategy involves 5 major tools or concepts that I'm going to be speaking about throughout this presentation, and I want to just explain to you a little bit what the acronyms are that I'll be using. First, the CAPS model. The CAPS model is a model that's been under development by UMass Amherst since 2000 or even earlier. CAPS stands for the Conservation Assessment and Prioritization System. It's essentially a landscape-level model that's based on GIS and land cover mapping. Next, the Index of Ecological Integrity, or the IEI. This is an important one. This is the output of the CAPS landscape-level model, and it's a 0 to 1 value for every 30-meter square point in the landscape, and it's based on all of the metrics in the CAPS model. So the CAPS output, which is, again, the IEI, or the Index of Ecological Integrity, is a prediction of ecological integrity based on the developed landscape. Next, the site-level assessment method, or as we call it, the SLAM, is simply a standard operating procedure for sampling. So we currently have SLAMs for forested wetlands, salt marshes, and shrub swamps. The Index of Biological Integrity is models that were developed by UMass Amherst that we use to assess actual ecological condition based on field data. And finally, the CALU, or the Continuous Aquatic Life Use, is a framework that's been developed that helps us to define the expected range of variability, or the normal range of variability for wetlands. And that's based on actual condition, which is the IBI, versus the predicted condition, which is the IEI, the output of the CAPS model. So the CALU framework tells us whether a site falls within a normal range of variability of what we would expect based on development, or whether it exceeds that or fails expectations. So these are the key tools that we use to conduct this assessment. There's 2 parts to this study. The first part is the landscape level assessment using CAPS, the landscape level model, and the second part is the site level assessment based on sampling data. I'll discuss these 2 parts today, beginning with the CAPS landscape level assessment. This map shows the CAPS IEI for the state of Massachusetts. Areas in blue indicate high ecological integrity, or more pristine areas, while areas in red and yellow indicate low ecological integrity, or more developed areas. The IEI is consistent with the extent of development, and again, the IEI is a value between 0 and 1. 0 is the most stressed, and 1 is the most pristine. At the time of this study, there were 20 stressor or resiliency metrics in the CAPS model. Most represent anthropogenic development, and 3 represent resiliency, or the ability of an ecosystem to respond to disturbance. The metrics are listed on this graphic. The CAPS model combines all of these metrics to get the IEI values that are shown on this map. Although CAPS is primarily based on GIS or landscape level data, field data from 250 forested wetlands, 164 salt marshes, and 490 wadable streams has been used for testing CAPS predictions and modifying as needed the CAPS model. It has always been our goal to create the best landscape level tool possible given the lack of resources to conduct extensive sampling. The field data was also used to develop IBIs, which I'll discuss later. The Chicopee Watershed was selected for this study. This was based on the MassDEP rotating basin sampling schedule for water sampling. To get an idea of forested wetland condition in the Chicopee compared to the rest of the state, we averaged the IEIs for forested wetlands in each major watershed. With the exception of one, the Chicopee Watershed average IEI for forested wetlands is greater than all of the other watersheds. You can see it outlined here in red with a value of 0.62. Again, with one being the most pristine and 0 being the most stressed. This value is likely due to the presence of the Quabbin Reservoir that serves the greater Boston area and the extensive undeveloped protected lands around it. Within the Chicopee watershed, we then averaged the IEI for all forested wetlands within each sub-watershed to get an idea of which areas are most degraded ecologically and which are more pristine. The areas in blue show the less stressed areas, such as the Quabbin Reservoir lands, and the areas in red show the more stressed areas, which are typically municipal centers. We also looked at which CAPS metrics indicated the greatest cause of stress within the watershed, and those include loss of terrestrial connectedness, loss of similarity, invasive plants, and loss of aquatic connectedness. In the report, we describe the causes of stress in the watershed and the ways to reduce these stressors and improve wetland conditions. I will now describe each one in more detail. This graphic shows the CAPS output for the loss of connectedness metric. This metric represents terrestrial fragmentation of forested wetlands. The loss of connectedness is one of the top 4 causes of stress to forested wetlands in the Chicopee watershed. Areas in brown and yellow indicate low IEI areas. These areas generally coincide with dense road networks and development, which are significant barriers to wildlife movement. UMass teamed up with the Nature Conservancy to develop the Critical Linkages project. Through this project, CAPS has the ability to identify and prioritize areas where terrestrial or aquatic connection or improvements in connection would have the greatest benefit to ecological integrity. This graphic shows the top 10% of locations identified by the Critical Linkages study that are also within 500 feet of forest wetlands where the installation of terrestrial wildlife crossing structures would have good potential to improve forested wetland condition. The report makes this data available to anyone interested. Also, the Critical Linkages study is available on the UMass website, and I'll provide the link at the end of this presentation. In addition to providing crossing structures to improve terrestrial connectedness, 2 other ways for improving or protecting connectedness of forested wetland systems are, first, to avoid new fragmentation. The photo on the left shows 2 homes with driveways abutting each other. A shared driveway would have minimized fill and potentially culvert length and minimize fragmentation of this wetland system that's shown in green. The Mass Wetlands Protection Act allows driveways that must cross a wetland to get from one area of upland to another as a limited project. Wetland crossings should be limited to 1 crossing per project and not multiple crossings. In the second picture, which is the photo on the right, a large forested wetland along a river is fragmented by an area of disturbance in the middle. This disturbed area is an example of a site that, if it were to become available, could potentially be restored to forested wetland condition to reconnect the two areas and improve connectedness. In general, opportunities should be identified to improve wetland connectedness in order to improve wetland condition. Another major cause of degradation in the Chicopee watershed is the loss of similarity. Connectedness is a function of both similarity of surrounding habitats and impediments to movement that I already discussed. Simply put, ecological communities that are large and easily accessible to each other have greater similarity than smaller isolated areas of the same community that are not accessible to each other. This is important for long-term integrity of communities as habitats shift due to climate change. Similarity is particularly important for flying organisms that are not affected by land-based obstructions. This graphic shows low similarity in yellow and brown, very similar to the loss of connectedness metric. The best way to mitigate for ecological stress from loss of similarity is buffer zone protection. The third major cause of degradation we identified from the landscape level assessment in the Chicopee watershed is loss of aquatic connectedness. Loss of aquatic connectedness is similar to terrestrial connectedness, except that instead of the focus being on the impacts of the roadway or other development, the focus is on the impact from the culvert, dam, or bridge on fish or wildlife passability along a waterway. In Massachusetts, we have incorporated the Massachusetts Stream Crossing Standards into the Wetland Protection Act and Water Quality Certification regulations. Thus, when projects are proposed that involve new or replacement crossings, the standards must be met to maintain or improve aquatic passage. Similar to terrestrial connectedness, CAPS has the ability to identify and prioritize where aquatic connection or improvements in connections would have the greatest benefit to ecological integrity. This graphic shows the top 10% aquatic crossing locations identified by the Critical Linkages Study that are also within 500 feet of forested wetlands. These are areas where new or improved aquatic crossing structures would have good potential to improve forested wetland condition. As part of this study, the MassDEP developed maps for each municipality in the Chicopee watershed where CAPS critical linkages analysis identified good locations for improved terrestrial or aquatic crossings in the top 10% that are also within 500 feet of forested wetlands. A link to these maps is provided at the end of this presentation. On this slide, you can see some of the terrestrial and aquatic crossing locations that were identified in two different colors. The last of the top 4 causes of degradation identified by the landscape level study is the likely presence of invasive plants. MassDEP conducted sampling at 45 sites throughout the watershed, which I will discuss in more detail in a minute. The sampling identified the invasive plants that you see here. Japanese barberry and glossy buckthorn are the most commonly identified invasive species that we found in our sampling of the Chicopee watershed. Fortunately, as you can see in this graph, invasives are not the most dominant plants found. The most abundant invasive is Japanese barberry at about a little greater than 4% cover near the bottom of this culvert, or bottom of this chart, excuse me. This is not as bad as it could be, but the data might represent some opportunities for invasive species management in the watershed. In the report, general locations where invasive plants were found and the type of plants found are identified, as well as recommendations for addressing the stressor. Recommended actions include working with landscapers to discourage the use of invasive species, monitoring wetland projects closely, especially wetland replacement projects where disturbed soils might present an opportunity for invasives to start new colonization. Proactively seeking restoration funding for eradication of invasive plants. The Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration is a good resource for restoration projects in Massachusetts. And also participation in the IPAIN, which is the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England, to map and track invasive plants. The report contains further information on this tool. We also included an appendix that includes all plants identified during sampling, and invasive species found are highlighted in those lists. Moving on to the second part of our study, the site level analysis. MassDEP sampled 45 forested wetlands using our site level assessment method, or SLAM, for forested wetlands. 40 sites were categorized by CAPS as having a low IEI, or which is they were very stressed. And 5 sites were assigned a high IEI, or those sites were closer to pristine. All sites drained into waters identified by MassDEP as being impaired. Within these parameters, sites were randomly selected. The sampling involved identification of a 30-meter radius plot with 4 25-meter transects and a 5-meter radius circle in the middle where sampling did not occur. Plants were recorded every meter for a total of 100 points. There was a 20-minute walk-around where all plants not encountered on the transects were recorded. IBIs were developed by UMass as tools for site-level assessment of data. To create the IBIs, UMass used data collected from 250 forested wetlands. This is the same training data I mentioned earlier that was used to test and modify the CAPS model, but it's different from the data we collected at the 45 sites for this study of the Chicopee Watershed. To create IBIs, UMass conducted statistical analyses to identify relationships between the CAPS stressor resiliency metrics and the taxa, or groups of taxon. These IBIs are empirically based and do not rely on expert opinion or the designation of reference sites. 48 of 120 IBIs developed for forested wetlands performed reliably, and plant IBIs were especially strong. In this study, we focused on plant IBIs that showed a strong relationship to the IEI, or the combination of all stressor and resiliency metrics. A full report on the development of the IBIs is available at the MassDEP and UMass websites, and links will be provided at the end of this presentation. The CALU model, it stands for Continuous Aquatic Life Use, provides an assessment as to where sites fall within the acceptable or normal range of variability. CALU compares the CAPS predicted IEI to the actual IBI from field data. The expected range of variability shown between the 2 dashed or lighter colored lines on this graph represents the range where 80% of the training data falls. 10% of the sites are expected to exceed, and 10% of the sites are expected to fail expectations. So this graph will show us, given the development in the surrounding landscape, where a site falls based on the site data. In the Chicopee Watershed, this graph shows the results of the CALU assessments for our 45 sites sampled. All 40 sites predicted by CAPS to have low IEI, or low ecological integrity, were found to have low IBI, or actual condition, that is stressed. A problem with the model, however, is that low IEI sites cannot fail. As you can see by this graph, the expected or normal range intersects the IEI scale at about 0.35. So any site with an IEI below 0.35 cannot fall below the normal range. However, the sites were expected to be low based on the model, and they were determined to be low. Our original expected normal range was based on data from the Millers, Chicopee, and Concord watersheds. These are primarily in the central part of Massachusetts, between Concord and the Connecticut River. Then additional forested wetland sites were added from the Taunton watershed in southeastern Massachusetts. This had the effect of widening the normal range, making us wonder whether one standard can be developed for an entire state with many ecoregions. This is a question we continue to have for our studies, as well as for other studies using similar or different methods, such as FQAI. Of the 5 sites predicted by CAPS to have a high IEI or to be closer to pristine, 2 met expectations and 3 failed. The map shows generally where the sites are located. The circles are the low IEI sites, all in green, and these are the ones that meet expectations. Although all of these sites met expectations, it's not acceptable to have sites with low ecological integrity, and so opportunities should be sought to improve ecological condition. Many recommendations have been presented in this report, such as providing or improving terrestrial and aquatic connections and eradicating invasive plants. We investigated the 3 high IEI sites that failed to see if we could determine why they failed. The first one, high IEI site 1, with failed expectations, is shown here on this graph. This graph is what we call a sediment plot. The vertical dashed line represents the CAPS predicted condition, or the IEI. And the vertical solid line represents the actual sampled IBI, or the actual condition. The width of the band of each plant represents the influence that that plant IBI has on the overall site IBI. The placement of the plant name shows where the plant falls, so a plant name on the left side of the graph would pull the site IBI down. A plant name on the right side of the graph would pull the site IBI up. On this graph, you can see the influential plants, including Carex crinita, a fringe sedge, Cornus amomum, a silky dogwood, Impatiens, a jewelweed, and Gallium, the bedstraw. Through investigation of aerial photos, we noticed that some changes have occurred over time that have affected this site's forested wetlands. In this photo, the sampled site is a blue triangle that is just above the label that says 2001 aerial image. It's hard to see, but there's also a label that says mature red maple dense tree canopy. So in 2001, there was a dense red maple tree canopy at this site. But towards the left of this photo, you can see that a beaver dam construction had just started. In 2005, the mature red maple dense tree canopy, shown label on the right, is still there. But we also noticed that a beaver lodge had also been constructed in addition to a beaver dam. In 2008, in addition to the original beaver dam and lodge, there was a new beaver dam under construction. And the photos started to show that although the mature red maple dense tree canopy continued to be there, it was showing signs of inundation were starting to show on the photo. In 2011, there was also another new beaver lodge constructed, so clearly this is a very active beaver area. And on the right side of the photo, you can see that our site was starting to become inundated and tree canopy was becoming sparse. Whoops. So clearly, although the site visit and sampling did not readily identify the failed condition, the CALU analysis flagged the site as failed for us. In this case, the cause of failure was a natural occurrence, or beaver, and so obviously no corrective action is needed. In fact, although the site fails as a forested wetland, it may succeed to a healthy shrub or emergent wetland. It is notable, however, that the CAPS IBI CALU analysis flagged this site based on the presence of vegetation that is wetter than what is typically found in forested wetland condition. On to high IEI Site 2, which also failed expectations. This site shows a similar situation. It was dominated by Carex crinita, a fringe sedge, biodins, or beggar ticks, Diplodium, which is a willow herb, and Lycomacea loosestrife. As you can see on this graph, again, the dashed vertical line is the IEI, or the predicted ecological integrity by the CAPS model, and the solid vertical line towards the left is the IBI, or the actual condition that we sampled. And the width of each layer of plant determines how much it affected the overall IBI of the site. So we investigated this site as well through aerial photos. This figure shows, again, beavers were moving in and changing the hydrology of the site from a seasonally flooded hydrology typically found in forested wetlands to a wetter hydrology. In this site, you can see two areas in particular, one with a dense stand of pines and one with sparse pine trees. The sampling site is, you have to look pretty closely to see it, but it's towards the right side of the photo. There's a blue triangle, and it says there's a little 2 above it. It's to the right of the sparse pine tree polygon. In this photo, this is 2008. Those same areas, one shows pine trees that are dead, and the other one has both of them have pine trees that have died. And we also noticed on this photo down near the bottom that there was a new beaver dam. An area up gradient of that beaver dam was becoming inundated. In 2011, the inundation seems to have expanded, and another area of extensive blowdowns and tip-overs was observed as well. And so we found again that, you know, the beaver activity seems to have affected this area and the condition of this wetland as a forested wetland. Similar to Site 1, the site failed expectations as a forested wetland, but may succeed to be a healthy shrub or emergent wetland. Obviously, again, no corrective action is needed to address the failed assessment for these two sites, but it is indicative that the CAPS, IBI, and CALU assessment accurately flagged the site as not meeting expectations. The third site that we assessed that failed, it was supposed to be high IEI or closer to pristine, and it failed expectations. We call this high IEI Site 5. This site was dominated by poison ivy, Toxicodendron, bidens or beggar ticks, Oclamina or aster, Rubus idaeus or red raspberry, Parthenocissus, Virginia creeper, Carex crinita, a fringe sedge, and Dryopteris carthusinia, wood fern. Again, you can see how far to the left the IBI vertical solid line is from the CAPS predicted dashed line on the right side of this graph. And the width of the bands show you the level of impact each plant had on the overall site IBI. As you can see, because the names of the species are over to the left side of the graph, that the IBI was brought way down from the IEI. We investigated this site. As you can see on this photo, there's a red circle in the middle called site, and that is where we did the sampling. Below that, there's a dark line that is labeled as approximate drainage divide, so it shows you the water flow direction by the yellow arrows in the vicinity of this site. After evaluating this aerial photo, we did not see any obvious sources of pollution anywhere in the vicinity, especially upstream. We looked at mapped areas of hazardous waste sites, which is what we refer to as 21E sites. We didn't see any that were close enough that it could have affected the condition here. We didn't see any obvious beaver dams or other hydrologic changes in the vicinity. There is a right-of-way, as you can see. One of them is just above the black drainage divide line, and then there's one further up on the photo. So the site does fall between what looks like two maintained right-of-ways, and there could be use of pesticides or herbicides here. But there was nothing that obviously jumped out at us as the cause of this site failing expectations. So one of the possible considerations is whether it's simply an error in the model. And this highlights the difficulty in associating stressed wetland condition with a specific source. In waters, the impairment might be more apparent, as well as the fix for the impairment. In wetlands, particularly those that are not immediately adjacent to waters, like emergent-type wetlands, the cause and the needed remediation can be very difficult to define. So, in summary, just want to summarize some of the conclusions we had from the study. First, it appears that the Massachusetts wetland monitoring and assessment tools, namely the CAPS and the IBI and the CALU framework, appears to be accurately predicting wetland condition based on this one pilot study, but much more study is needed. Of the 40 sites predicted by the CAPS model to have degraded condition, the site assessment confirmed that prediction. Of the 5 sites predicted to have good condition, 2 were confirmed, but 3 failed expectations. Of those 3, 2 appear to be accurate, and 1 may be spurious or invalid. Restoration opportunities were identified and should be pursued, including installation or improvement of terrestrial and aquatic crossings, eradication of invasive plants, and protection of the buffer zone. Because obviously, even though those 40 sites that were predicted to have low IEI or low condition and were confirmed to have low condition through site assessment, that is not an acceptable condition to have a lot of our wetlands in. There should be efforts to pursue restoration if possible. Also, MassDEP has not determined the best site selection strategy, and we have an ongoing debate with UMass as to whether we should be doing probabilistic or targeted sampling. So that's an ongoing consideration in our program. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there is a limitation in assessing sites predicted to have low IEI or low conditions, since the model precludes them from failing. More study is needed to understand the robustness of the IBIs and what level of accuracy is in using them as a statewide tool across all watersheds. Further development of additional shrub IBIs and emergent slam and IBIs are needed. So I'll leave you with these two pictures of the Chicopee Watershed. These are two of the sites that we visited and sampled. And also these links are to, the top link is to the Chicopee Monitoring and Assessment reports and the maps that we developed. The second link is our monitoring and assessment webpage that includes some of the studies that we've done, some of the studies that UMass has done, and also the UMass CAPS webpage, which contains the critical links to studies as well as IEI maps and other relevant data to this report. And at this point, I will, I think, turn it back over to Kim and take any questions if there are any. Kim, you there?
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I didn't get any questions during your presentation, so I am going to open up the phone lines and see if we have questions there.
Your line has been unmuted.
All right. Any questions for Lisa?
Hi, Lisa and Kim. This is Beth.
Hey, Beth.
Thank you so much. That was such an interesting presentation. And
Hi, Beth.
So timely, especially the comment on the need for buffers to protect the ecological integrity of these sites.
Definitely.
I guess that was really telling. I'm wondering if there are other indicators besides vegetation that you're thinking about in the future, looking at maybe, I was thinking on some of the pristine sites, was there a major, I don't know, groundwater, I can't think of the right word, but basically was there a well nearby, and was that taking some of the groundwater out of the forested wetland, and could that lead to a change in the vegetation?
I think we looked to see if there were any wells nearby, and I do not think that we saw any of those either, but okay. I'll look, that's a good point. We did think about adding bryophytes to the assessment because at some of our mitigation sites that we've looked at preliminarily, it seems that certain bryophytes seem to have a big impact on the condition of mitigation areas. So we have considered doing that. In addition, we've considered looking at, you know, in some of our work on mitigation areas, which we haven't completed yet, we've thought about whether invertebrates or diatom algae might be good to add to that mix, since, you know, in mitigation areas, plant communities are not well developed or might not be well developed, or they might reflect planted species that, you know, that it might mask the real condition. Mm-hmm. So those are a couple things we have thought about adding, but we haven't done so yet. This summer we're still looking at just doing plants, but that is, you know, I think maybe a little limiting.
I had a second question if no one else does.
Okay.
You gave the maps to the towns of where you know, what the results of your study and showing where there's potential connections that could be made, aquatic connectivity and then the terrestrial. Were there specific towns that were interested in that and looking at? Well,
we haven't, we posted them on our website. So we haven't like made hard copies and sent those to the towns, but we did post them on our website.
Yeah, because I think it would work really well in their planning framework. You know, if they're looking to replace culverts and they only have a certain amount of money, how they could prioritize that.
Right. It definitely would be a good opportunity for towns to try to prioritize, you know, some of their funds for restoration.
Mm-hmm. It was great. So thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, we plan to do some more work on that.
Any other questions for Lisa?
You mentioned, sorry, I keep chiming in. You mentioned the Taunton watershed, and now I'm trying to remember exactly what the relationship was between this study and what's happening in the Taunton. Do you recall?
Yeah, the Taunton watershed was, a lot of the watersheds that we sampled prior to sampling the Chicopee, so like between 2007 and about 2012 or so, we were collecting training data. We call it training data, but it's basically data that was used just for the purpose of like testing the CAPS metrics and improving that model, and also for developing the IBIs. Okay. So we originally had data from the Millers, the Chicopee, and the Concord watersheds, which are all essentially in the middle, like third of the country, of the state. Sorry, Mike. When we collected data in the Taunton watershed and added that, it resulted in what was considered to be a normal range, to be a bigger range, because the Taunton watershed is such a different ecoregion from those other ones that we had previously sampled. Southeastern Mass has very different geology and different plant species, and so it resulted in our range of what's considered normal to be much wider than what we originally had, which is why we, are wondering whether it would be best to really develop IBIs by ecoregion. And although we think we know the answer to that, that it would be best, it's very, very resource intensive, and so we may just have to, settle on what's good and not what's best. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, it does have implications for use of FQAI and other, and IBIs.
Well, when you think about ecoregions and you think about scale, like there's the regional ecoregions, and then I'm not sure if you're referring to the same ecoregions that we use, or is it a smaller scale in Massachusetts?
Yes, we are. Ecoregions.
Well, that's the direction EPA is going in, that's for sure. Some of our projects, but.
Yeah, we're using EPA ecoregions, and we think that, if it's possible to focus on the ecoregion, that's probably going to get you a better value closer.
Sounds like a good topic for NEBUG.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
All right. Did anybody else have questions for Lisa or any other assessments that they'd like to talk about, that they have questions that Lisa or Mike, who's still in the room, could possibly answer?
Hi, this is Anna Mayer, Massachusetts Water Quality Standards Section.
Hi, Anna.
Hi. I was wondering if there was any attempt to determine a species, like animal species diversity versus plant species diversity. I didn't hear mention of any notations about that you evaluated that side of the life in the wetland.
Yeah, for this analysis, we only focused on plants, as the plants. The IBI, we were looking to simplify our sampling, and the IBIs that were developed by UMass for assessment purposes had good, showed good concordance. So the plants seemed to be a good way to test the IBIs, because they were part of our consideration was just simplicity in the field and sort of trying to do a rapid assessment. So none of the taxa that we sampled for development of these tools included animals either, but we did, you know, the training data included invertebrates, algae, earthworms. That's about as close to animals or wildlife as we got. When we started to develop salt marsh IBIs, and that work's still underway, but there was a desire to sample birds, to do birds, but we felt that that doing so would be too time intensive to actually get good, you know, data on birds. I think that UMass is reconsidering whether there are other ways to do that, to get data on birds. But other than that, we haven't done any extensive, you know, work on, you know, animals or wildlife.
Lisa?
Yeah, hi.
Hi, this is Jerry Zoll.
Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for letting us know about this.
Oh, sure.
You know, we're doing some work with nutrients and along the coast, and you had a map. I saw all these blue areas along the coast, and we just ran across a site by Linda Deegan, who works at the Marine Biological Lab, the Woods Hole Laboratory, and she's doing work in Plum Island and has noticed that nutrients are affecting saltwater marshes. Do you have information on, did you do studies of saltwater marshes and see any degradation? I don't know if you know of Linda Deegan's work. It just came out in Nature recently, I've heard.
She's from Woods Hole, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We worked doing sampling of salt marshes for, you know, in the collection of our training data for about, you know, 5 or 6 years or 7 years. Went out there with coastal zone management. Of course, we saw a lot of slumping of salt marshes. Yeah, so that is definitely something that's happening out there. And
so you did?
What? Oh, yeah, sure.
You did see slumping in salt marshes?
Of course, yeah, definitely. But
okay, I've got to talk to you after this then.
But we had many conversations with CZM folks about that, about what they think, you know, is the cause of that. And, you know, there are several theories out there that I don't think there has been an answer to. One is potentially nutrients, and another is that a certain crab species may be causing that, and a third was sea level rise. So those are... Yeah,
Linda Deegan's work, well, we can talk more, but Linda Deegan's work is showing that what's happening is that they did nutrient loading in
right.
Plum Island area.
Right.
So, I don't know. So maybe you're familiar with her work already.
Yes. No, I mean, I was familiar with that when it was being done, and as was CZM. So, you know, one of the interesting things is that in the effort to develop IBIs for salt marshes, UMass have a lot of luck, and so there are a lot of things going on in salt marshes that we don't fully understand. So, you know, we think other considerations have to be maybe added to that work in order to get IBIs that are actually useful. There's a lot of things going on, like sea level rise, temperature, you know, temperature change and pH change and things like that were not considered when we started the work. So that's ongoing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. If there are any other questions or discussions that you guys would like to have, I will move to the end and say thank you for attending, and thank you to Lisa for presenting.
Thank you.
Enjoy your field season this summer. If you missed any episodes in our series, you can go ahead and visit newpic.org/wetlands/ webinars. This will be saved and uploaded there, as well as many of our past episodes that we've had. Look for us in the fall. Have a great summer, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.